Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today I'm going to be reacting to the YouTuber Genetically Modified Skeptic on the topic of autogynephilia. If you don't know who this guy is, he is a atheist, skeptical YouTuber, and he's been pushing a lot of gender ideology lately, sort of going to bat for the trans activists, sort of defending the trans activist scientific approach. And I already did a video on this guy a while back. Is one of the live sessions I did where I reacted to one of his attempts to take down the hypothesis of rapid onset gender dysphoria by Lisa Littman. I pretty much showed that his take was completely wrong and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And once again, he is completely out of his depth on the topic of autogynephilia. I'm going to decisively prove that he does not know what he's talking about. And I want to take this guy down because he's so smug. He's so arrogant. A lot of these new atheist guys are so smug, and how they're the arbiters of science and they know science better than everyone else. And he's like always using science to justify his like beliefs and stuff. And he thinks the science is on his side. But on the topic of autogynephilia, he is wrong. He's just dead wrong. And I'm going to demonstrably prove that. And by whatever random chance you are watching this genetically modified skeptic, I would gladly debate you on this topic because you just don't know what you're talking about. So, okay, let's get into the video.
And this is specifically like,
actually, hold on. Let me back up a little bit. Okay, here we go.
On a final point of pseudoscience here. Yeah. This was some.
Yeah, he calls it pseudoscience, but why is it considered pseudoscience? Presumably he thinks it's pseudoscience because it can't be falsified, which is a common claim made by trans activists, say that Blanchard's research is unscientific because it can't be falsified. Well, I could think of many ways to easily falsify the theory. So Blanchard has a two-type typology saying that there's two major kinds of trans women. And if it were the case that homosexual androphilic trans women reported more incidences of arousal at cross-gender fantasy, then Blanchard's typology would be decisively refuted, because the theory is based on the idea that autogynephilia is a inversion of gynophilic attraction, inversion of attraction to women and femininity. So if it were the case that actually cross-gender fantasy arousal was more common in androphilic homosexual trans women who were attracted to men exclusively, then the theory would be falsified. So already we see that the theory could be very easily falsified. So this claim that it's pseudoscience is like complete bullshit.
Thing that I found in both his interview with Kathleen Stock, which is kind of a gender critical philosopher. She's a professor. Again, no expertise in this actual subject, and you can tell.
Yeah, as if you have expertise in the subject, and yet you're also pontificating about this stuff that you don't know what you're talking about.
All by the things that she says. Helen Joyce also echoes this. It's kind of a conspiracy theory of sorts.
To claim that Blanchard's theory of autogynephilia is a conspiracy theory is completely ridiculous. It's a scientific hypothesis. And it's a scientific hypothesis that has a lot of empirical support. So to claim that it's some transphobic, conspiracy theory is ridiculous. If you want to, attack the theory, attack it on the grounds of empiricism, attack it on the grounds of the data and the arguments. But to dismiss it out of hand as like, pseudoscientific conspiracy theory makes it sound like this theory was just like cooked up in some crackpot's basement, but it's not. So, if you just go to Google Scholar and type in autogynephilia, there's literally like dozens and dozens and dozens of like articles that are talking about this. Yeah, there are some some of this stuff on Google Scholar is like criticisms of the theory, but to dismiss it out of hand as just like, a conspiratorial pseudo type of thing is like ridiculous. Just for example, like, like Kevin Su is one of the researchers who works in this area, and he works with Dr. Michael Bailey, and these are like respected researchers. And they've developed a elaborate theoretical explanation to account for this, which is generalizable across many different domains. So this paper here, erotic target identity inversions, they say that erotic target identity inversions refer to some men's sexual arousal by the fantasy of being the same kinds of individuals to whom they are sexually attracted. And they've discovered that this phenomenon is generalizable across multiple domains of erotic interest. And they back this up with empirical research, with like validated, measurement scales and like, statistical research, and like, this is real science. And like, if you want to dismiss it on the grounds of science, attack the scientific arguments, but to just say that this is like a conspiracy theory, it's like ridiculous. There's this other post here by Phil Illey who, catalogs a bunch of the research that's been done on this typology. There's this research going back to like 1985, and just like, there's just so much research here that to just dismiss this as like, being a conspiracy or pseudoscience, it's a complete cop out. It's a way to sort of like poison the well and like, get people to not, look for themselves, because like, oh, well, this smart atheist skeptic guy says it's pseudoscience, so I must not take it seriously. There must not be anything to this. So we can just dismiss it out of hand as like a pseudoscientific conspiracy. It's ridiculous. Okay, let's go back to the video.
And it's the idea that the reason why people transition is because it is merely a fetish.
No, you don't even know what you're talking about. It does not say that it is merely a fetish. It says that from an ideological perspective, the propensity, the disposition to be aroused at the thought or idea of embodying aspects of womanhood is a causal, it's at the causal root of the development of gender dysphoria. But the actual decision to transition, there's obviously other causal factors as well. And Blanchard himself has said repeatedly that it's not just a fetish, because he likens it more to like a orientation. Because if it was just a fetish, if it was purely driven merely by fetishism, then once these trans women removed their testicles and lowered their sexual libido, then the desire for cross-sex identification would diminish, because if it was purely driven by the libido, purely driven by arousal, then you wouldn't see this phenomenon where, after medical transition, after the chemical or real castration, then the cross-sex identity persists, because this is deeply embedded into people's psychology. But nevertheless, even though after the medical transition that the desires persist, it doesn't mean that like prior to transition, when trans women were first developing these gender confusion and gender fantasies, that it doesn't have its roots in the erotic. So it's about what are the roots, the origins of the phenomenon. It's not about characterizing the entirety of transition, the entirety of cross-sex identity as merely fetishistic, because that's a reductionistic perspective which doesn't take into account the full range of complexity and how often after transition the eroticism transforms into more of an emotional romantic bond, which is why Anne Lawrence talks about how there's both an erotic dimension, but also a romantic attachment, emotional dimension to this. And also, the phenomenon of autogynephilia manifests in a wide variety of different ways, whereas for some people it is purely fetishistic cross-dressing, but for other people it has a more emotional perspective, and it's not even driven by eroticism, because a lot of AGPs are actually asexual or alloerotic. They're not even attracted to other people. It's like all their attraction is like internally directed emotional attachment to the idea of oneself as like a woman. So he's just attacking a straw man, and attacking a straw man is a fallacy.
And this is specifically levied at trans women. The idea is that they are autogynephiles. They are like men with autogynephilia.
There are significant.
No, it's males who have a particular type of atypical sexuality that is driven from an inversion of their heterosexual attraction to women. And that inversion of their heterosexual attraction to women drives cross-sex fantasy ideation, which is why it's so common in transgender communities to talk about how, prior to their egg cracking, it was a kink. So, which is why in trans communities, it's so common to ask the question, am I trans or is it just a fetish? Because it's very common for trans women to start their gender exploration, either watching trans pornography, watching or like reading, transgender, gender swap, transformation erotica, getting into sissy kink, this stuff is all very common. Prior to the egg cracking, prior to the development of the full-blown trans identity, a lot of this stuff develops in the form of eroticism. And this is widely acknowledged in the transgender community.
Significant numbers of men who find it very sexy to think of themselves as lesbians. Probably as many of those as there are actual lesbians.
Most trans women, that is men, who identify as women, are heterosexual. And they have a fetish. Yes. I mean, that's the other thing that I might as well say, because no one, in polite society refers to it, but there is a fetish called autogynephilia, which a man may have.
And again, I mean, if you've done some of the kind of basic research of this stuff, the history of the development of ideas surrounding human sexuality just in the last 20, 30 years, that this is a typology of transness that was created by Ray Blanchard in 1987. In fact, in 2000.
Yeah, see, he like doesn't even know what he's talking about. Doesn't even know the origins of the research.
2009, there's this kind of wonderful study that surveyed women to see if women had any kind of traits or thoughts that could type them as autogynephiles. And it turned out that if you said, have you ever been sexually aroused by the image of yourself as a woman, or thinking of yourself as a woman, or in women's clothes or in lingerie, this, over 90% of women could have been classified as autogynephiles, people with this obscure trans fetish, right? Now, if you take that to, have you had these experiences or thoughts or fantasies or arousal multiple times, then it's something like 25 to 30% of women could be classified. And cisgender women, right? Like people like Helen Joyce and Kathleen Stock. What's the takeaway there? Maybe.
Okay, so this guy claims to be Mr. Science. Oh, I'm Mr. Science. I'm gonna, he always tries to cite studies and backs up his statements with like research and stuff. Mr. Science, but Mr. Science is completely scientifically illiterate and can't do the basic, research on this. And he's just so wrong. So let's actually look at that study by Charles Moser, which this study by Charles Moser has done more damage and spread more misinformation about this topic than almost anything else. So first off, this was a questionnaire that was given to 29, the sample size is 29 women in a hospital. So that already, that is not a big enough sample size to conclude that 93% of, quote unquote, cisgender women are autogynephilic. It's just not. That's not a big enough sample size. Furthermore, the actual question that they developed. So Moser did not give these women the same scale that was used to measure autogynephilia in males and transsexual women. He made up his own scale, and he made up his own scale because the way he asked the questions was such that it made it more likely for women to be confused about the question. So this is not Blanchard's scale. So we're measuring different things and then concluding that using a scale that measures different things, that, women are just as autogynephilic as like transsexual women. And it's just not the case. And the big problem with Moser's scale is that he confuses the eroticism that women have when they're imagining themselves getting ready for a date. So if we look at which are the scales that have the highest answers, the highest AGP scale for these women. It's when I have been erotically aroused by dressing in lingerie or sexual attire for a romantic evening, or when hoping to meet a sex partner, or I have been erotically aroused by preparing for a romantic evening, or when hoping to meet a sex partner. So these had the highest response rate. So we can see that these women are confusing in the scale, because just because you give a questionnaire to like random people, it doesn't mean they understand the question of like what you're trying to drive at, what you're trying to measure. And so we can see that these women are confusing the autogynephilia with sort of being aroused when getting ready for a date, because female sexuality is more relational in that sense. It's like responsive. It's like responsive to the desire of men. So yes, like when women are getting ready to go on a date with a man, that they're going to get horny by putting on like, you know, sexy lingerie or whatever. But that's just not the same thing as autogynephilia. And why? So if we look at this study here, the psychometric structure of items assessing autogynephilia by Kevin Sue, Michael Bailey, and A.M. Rosenthal, they sort of break down by a factorial analysis the factor loading of the autogynephilia items. And we can see that, you know, so it's like having a nude female body, having women's breasts, being a woman, having a vagina, having a woman's buttocks, having a woman's legs, having a woman's face, wearing makeup, wearing a dress, wearing women's underwear, getting hair done at a salon, being pregnant, lactating and breastfeeding. Yeah, like are regular women getting like aroused, lactating and breastfeeding, or the thought of breastfeeding? Are they getting aroused at the idea of menstruating and using tampons? Are they being aroused simply in virtue of thinking of their body? No, the women are being aroused at the thought of having sex with men. They're not being aroused by merely having or merely thinking about their own bodies. They're not being aroused. Now, I do want to say, I want to preface that, because there is this phenomenon called autosexuality, where autosexuality is like where you do sort of can get turned on by, you know, thinking of how hot you are as a woman. But I would not, and some women do seem to be more autosexual than allosexual, but those are a minority of women. For example, there was like this article by like Kim Kardashian where she talked about how the hottest thing for her is to think of herself and like look at her own body, but that is not normal female sexuality. That is not normal. That whereas for trans women, this is normal trans women sexuality, is to, you know, be turned on merely by the idea of having a vagina, merely the idea of being a woman, that just the thought of being a woman. Whereas like, you know, these questions here from like the Moser study, they're not merely that the thought of like being a woman. Normal women are not turned on merely by the thought of being a woman, merely by the thought, and you know, or like you know, wearing perfume, just wearing women's underwear, because it's not even like you know, sexy underwear as you're getting ready for a date. You know, going to the women's bathroom. I mean, women just aren't turned on by this. So these are totally different phenomena, and they have a superficial relationship with female sexuality, insofar as some degree of female sexuality is autosexual, but autosexuality is not the primary thing that drives normal heterosexual females like sexual interest. Normal female heterosexual erotic interest is driven by a responsive relational reaction to the thought of like dating men. That's normal for women. So this stuff right here, it is not the same as you know, as like what women are experiencing. And furthermore, there's this great study published by Michael Bailey and Kevin Sue called "How Autogynephilic Are Natal Females?" So when you actually give natal females the proper autogynephilia scale, the core autogynephilia scale that Ray Blanchard uses, then you can see that. So let me just read the abstract here. So Blanchard proposed that autogynephilia is a natal male's paraphilic sexual arousal in response to the thought or fantasy of being a woman. Furthermore, based on evidence collected from natal males with gender dysphoria, Blanchard argued that autogynephilia is the fundamental motivation among non-homosexual males, i.e. those not exclusively attracted to men who pursue sex reassignment surgery or live as transgender women. These ideas have been challenged by several writers who have asserted or offered evidence that autogynephilia is common among women. However, their evidence was weakened by problematic measures and limited comparison groups. We compared 4 samples of autogynephilic natal males with a much higher sample size, so like sample size of 1,500, 4 samples of non-autogynephilic natal males, so another large sample size, and 2 samples of natal females, sample size of 500, using Blanchard's original measure, the core autogynephilia scale. The autogynephilic samples had much higher mean scores compared with non-autogynephilic natal males and natal females who were similar. Our findings refute the contention that autogynephilia is common among natal females. And yet this guy has the audacity to say that the theory of autogynephilia is some like conspiratorial, pseudoscientific, crackpot theory, when it's reality, it's Moser's study that is more closer to like pseudoscience because of its poor sample size, its poor measurement methodology, and the fact that the scale was like intentionally designed to get a response that he knew would be used to attack the theory of autogynephilia, because the theory of autogynephilia is not politically expedient to transgender activists, and Moser is an activist as a researcher. So yeah, it's just like the like whole thing is like so ridiculous that this attempt by these activists over the past few decades to demonize Ray Blanchard's research as conspiratorial, pseudoscientific, debunked is like gotta be one of the biggest gaslighting and psyops in like scientific history of all time. It's like so crazy. So all right, well, I think I said all I wanted to say. Hopefully I demonstratively showed that Genetically Modified Skeptic does not know what he's talking about, and he's just like looks like a total idiot on this issue. So yeah, and like I said, if you're listening to this Genetically Modified Skeptic and you want to debate me on this, I'd be happy to debate you. So all right, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and bye-bye.